Okay, so Ernesto Lodi is a researcher in social psychology at University of Sassari, where he teaches community psychology and elements of international restorative justice. He is an honorary judge as expert in psychology at the Juvenile Court of Sassari. Is part of several international research groups on positive psychology, career development, organizational psychology, and restorative justice. He is a member of the board of directors of the Italian Association for Vocational Guidance, and he is a scientific responsible of the laboratory positive psychology and psychosocial well-being, in charge of research methodology and data analysis, both for psychological counseling service and for the restorative practices team. And moreover, he is the didactic coordinator in the master degree, Restorative Justice and Mediation for the well-being of people and communities. And his keynote is supporting life and career paths in complex contexts, career intervention to promote justice and deal with vulnerable situations. So you can start.
Thank you, Cristina. Thank you, Cristina, for the presentation. And good morning. I thank all the partners of this project, in particular University of Padua, for inviting me to speak at this event. I feel very close to the topic of your project because I lived in South America for 6 months of my life, and I care about the destiny of this population. So thank you for work on this project. I have immediately apologized in advance for 2 reasons. One is that my English will not be perfect, given my Spanish language experience. English is my 3rd language, actually. And the second reason is that I am involved in an institutional commission with my university in this day. So I gained only 15 minutes to be with you. I'm very sorry for not being able to interact much with you, but I will send my email if you are interested in my presentation. And so I will talk to you in general about topics that concern the more purely social aspect that I think is related to career development. For years in Italy, as a CEO, we had an headlight in memorandum paper on vocational guidance, because the paper invite us to interpreting individual needs, expectation, aspiration, also considering their contextual determinants and social impacts, to remove barriers and obstacles to professional growth, to adopt models and practices of vocational guidance, interactive, and trying to change the context, inclusive and safe for the people, to be agents of change. As you can see, is a vision that poses what are the unique and traditional stories of seeing guidance and its function. We are historically accustomed to a concept of individual career development, to see ourselves and people in career path as closing in a kind of bubble, in seeing the career path as linear and free from the contextual factor. But let's ask ourselves how much this contributes to increasing selfishness, the tendency to compete, creating the conditions so that anti-altruistic behavior are approved in our community, in our life, and in the career development paths also. The Latin said, mors tua vita mea, your death is my life. But our planet, not only understood as a physical thing, is telling us that we cannot continue in this way. We have built an unjust world, and as a professional of educational guidance, we have to do our part to undo injustice by contributing to social justice also through our work. Precisely because career paths reflect, transmit, and amplify the structural injustice of our society. very often through the power of prejudice and stereotypes on people without power. Precisely because career path, we are used to see career path as a linear, but anyone working career path know that career paths are more similar on the right side of the slide to the lines that you can see in the other part. There is a kind of a dangerous single story about career development as an individual factor, only an individual question. And speaking about the danger of a single story, we'll see a part of a video of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, a Nigerian writer. Before seeing the video, another contribution to my presentation comes from Zimbardo. Maybe you know Zimbardo for the Stanford experiment and the Lucifer effect. Now his topic research is the opposite. The courage, because courage is a sort of is a kind of positive deviance, counter stereotyped view of reality and public apathy, promoting prosocial behavior. In his TED talk on dispositional and contextual approach, he said we have to move away from a medical model. We have always treated, as a social science, everything according to a dispositional and internal model. Bullying is disease, prejudice is disease, violence is disease. You want to know something? It doesn't work. Also because the system occur that respond only in individual way. We have to change also the context. See a part of video of Chimamanda. Sorry, one moment. Vedo più il video. Eccolo.
What this demonstrates, I think, is how impressionable and vulnerable we are in the face of a story, particularly as children. Because all I had read were books in which characters were foreign, I had become convinced that books, by their very nature, had to have foreigners in them and had to be about things with which I could not personally identify. Now, things changed when I discovered African books. There weren't many of them available, and they weren't quite as easy to find as the foreign books. But because of writers like Chinua Achebe and Kamara Laye, I went through a mental shift in my perception of literature. I realized that people like me, girls with skin the color of chocolate, whose kinky hair could not form ponytails, could also exist in literature. I started to write about things I recognized. Now, I loved those American and British books I read. They stirred my imagination, they opened up new worlds for me. But the unintended consequence was that I did not know that people like me could exist in literature. So what the discovery of African writers did for me was this: it saved me from having a single story of what books are. I come from a conventional middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, living domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed us a beautifully patterned basket made of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me as an African was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I must say that before I went to the US, I didn't consciously identify as African. But in the US, whenever Africa came up, people turned to me, never mind that I knew nothing about places like Namibia. But I did come to embrace this new identity, and in many ways, I think of myself now as African, although I still get quite irritable when Africa is referred to as a country, the most recent example being my otherwise wonderful flight from Lagos 2 days ago, in which there was an announcement on the Virgin flight about their charity walk in India, Africa, and other countries. So after I had spent some years in the US as an African, I began to understand my roommate's response to me. If I had not grown up in Nigeria, and if all I knew about Africa were from popular images, I too would think that Africa was a place of beautiful landscapes, beautiful animals, and incomprehensible people fighting senseless wars, dying of poverty and AIDS, unable to speak for themselves, and waiting to be saved by a kind white foreigner. I would see Africans in the same way that I, as a child, had seen Fide's family. This single story of Africa ultimately comes, I think, from Western literature.
And the second part, sorry, we don't have enough time to see all the video.
Negatives of difference, of darkness, of unheard, different versions of this single story. As had a authentically African number of places, but I had not quite imagined that it had failed at achieving authenticity was. Quite willing to contend that there were a number of things wrong with the novel, that it had failed in a number of places, but I had not quite drove car.
Sorry for this.
But I must quickly add that I too am just as guilty on the question of the single story. A few years ago, I visited Mexico from the US. The political climate in the US at the time was tense, and there were debates going on about immigration. And as often happens in America, immigration became synonymous with Mexicans. There were endless stories of Mexicans as people who were fleecing the healthcare system, sneaking across the border, being arrested at the border, that sort of thing. I remember walking around on my first day in Guadalajara, watching the people going to work, rolling up tortillas in the marketplace, smoking, laughing. I remember first feeling slight surprise, and then I was overwhelmed with shame. I realized that I had been so immersed in the media coverage of Mexicans that they had become one thing in my mind, the abject immigrant. I had bought into the single story of Mexicans, and I could not have been more ashamed of myself. So that is how to create a single story. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. It is impossible to talk about the single story with
very powerful video. I invite you to see all the videos for our work, especially if we deal with the vulnerable population. As you can see, no one is free from the influence of the single story. We have to ask ourselves how it impacts on the career development processes. The single story is particularly dangerous about the people in condition of vulnerability. The risk to see only a part of a person, try to think how dangerous is, for example, for a person with different abilities or different culture, to be perceived as represented only by that different ability or culture of origin. Chimamanda said in another part of the video that all the story contains truths. The single story is incomplete. The truth is incomplete, and we have to know the other part of the truth in the story, in the stories. After this premise, we are ready maybe to start to talk about the social function of vocational guidance, widening the range of opportunities felt to be available for the people, not allow the social inequalities in career paths to be reproduced, believing in the value of diversity and working to deconstruct the stereotypes associated with it, promoting in people the possibility to regain the voice and the possibility of fulfillment within their communities. Also contributing to their development, because the realization of individual aspiration, dream, or even just being able to move and pursue them is related to the capacity of the community to provide spaces where these aspirations and dreams can take shape. In this focus, in this social focus, is there a desirable start to the career intervention? For me, not a precise, not a right age. There is perhaps a favorite moment when boys and girls begin to dream and aspire, because in this moment, attitudes, thoughts, and behaviors for the future can encounter the limits of the context, and possible this dream, those individual and social meaning encounter these limits built on and by inequalities and different forms of individual and social vulnerability. As an example, I tell you another story. It's Kakenya and Taya. I will tell you the story of Kakenya and Taya, and it will not be an individual career story. Kakenya is not a professional counselor. She is a teacher. Like many Maasai women, she suffered the horrendous practice of infibulation by her community. The same community, in another moment, gave her the money to study abroad. Now we have the first action, courageous action of Kakenya. She then decided to come back in her village and create a school for girls and save them from that horrible fate. But she knows that it's not enough. It's not enough because we have to change also the context, also the social situation. And Kakenya opens the school, for example, to the boys, because they will become future adult males in that community. Involves local institution and use the positive aspect of Maasai culture involving the elders, for example, in educational processes. In the end, one of her children, Lynette, only in second moment supported also by her family, will go to study in Australia and meet Obama. It's a real impressive for me, the last photo sequence that you can see in the downside of the slide. And Kakenya said, not all girls will get a PhD like Lynette, but they will have the opportunity to fulfill their full potential. Some question, Kakenya and Taya declined the goals of a 2030 agenda in her career path and supporting other career paths. What would have been the future of boys and girls without her courageous and altruistic career choice? Exaggerating, what would Lynette profiling and matching processes have told us without Kakenya about their future, her future and career she was to pursue? Kakenya, for me, fully exercised the social function of vocational guidance, embodying the aims, outcomes, and value of our profession. Although not by definition as career counselor, she masterfully became one. She transformed the context and unlocked individual and social potential. This is for me the real core of social function of vocational guidance. It seems like a distant context to us with the situation of extreme poverty, but in reality, there are contexts much closer to us regarding Western society, for example, in the second part of the slide, that reproduce the same content, the same dynamics. Even if less visible, we have implicit barriers in this case. In population at risk of vulnerability, intervening only on individual level is a useful intervention, yes, but it does not produce change in the context. I believe that the future of vocational guidance is to focus also on changing context that produce social inequalities, also interacting, of course, with other disciplines. It is, for me, a justice goal for our work. I will tell you about a specific context. As you can see in my presentation by Cristina, I deal with justice in many ways in my career, and in particular in restorative justice. In prison, we have carried out both career counseling activities and a restorative justice project. I can tell you prison is a very interesting place to observe the structural injustice we are talking about. We know that stigmatization processes risk affecting and compromising personal and professional paths, as Santilli and colleague said. Stereotypes and prejudice produce the individualization, increasing the sense of distance between people through the categorization and form of social exclusion are related to the experimentation of stereotypes and intolerance. Prisoners are particularly vulnerable in job search due to the stigma associated with incarceration, the low level of education, and relegated to specific sectors such as construction and food-related services. Career in this context develop forcibly according to what the context offers. Often, you know, our jails are built in the middle of the nothing, without any contextual support. You can see the power of the stigma during our project in Tempio Pausania, in the jail. The power of the stigma in this newspaper article. The title is Mafia Boss, with the name and surname here, published, hired at Elders Center. A local politician said it's a shame. And actually, this man was part of our project. He had been condemned for mafia crime, but he was actually not a boss, much less he had been hired, but simply is carrying out voluntary activity as inside this treatment program. This is the cultural obstacles to the career path of these people. So what we can do in this context? Supporting the career path of prisoners have a social impact on our community of life. As Robertson said, it is not an individual level question or issue or intervention to support prisoners, but it can also be considered at a community social level to deliver more justice and more peace in our community. There is a large potential benefits for our society in crime reduction through educational and vocational guidance pathways, because research, the evidence from research is improving access to education, training, employment support paths can improve employment outcomes. Career intervention tend to reduce the recidivism. Counseling produce higher level of professional maturity and professional self-efficacy, for example. Other studies show that prisoners who participate in programs for improving education and job readiness during the period of detention are less likely to reoffend. Also, our Ministry of Justice reported that only the 20% of prisoners would start working after their sentence, return to crime. On the other hand, this percentage is around 70% for the people don't find work after the sentence. Recidivism is lower among those who find not a casual job, but a stable and quality job after the prison. Counseling increase also other important variable for our work. Ability to explore, identify, for example, career interest, employment option, etc. What else about the context? We know that the effects of detention, and I won't point out just some of aspects most related to our work, say thus that prison is an enabling context on individual and social level. First of all, the loss of social role, all living the prison experience leads back to a single role, the offender. This meaning obscures other spheres of personal life, very important for us, for example, to reset a different future perspective. The prison eliminates individual differences. The needs, desires, and the dreams of the prisoner are cancelled and replaced by other ether-induced. We have also a reduction in interest or participation in meaningful activities or loss of future perspective, very important also for us. A little focus on minors, young people. Our ministry has said generally belong to vulnerable social group before they enter in the penal circuit. And the ministry underlined the importance of school, cultural and vocational training as a fundamental criterion for personal autonomy, the urgency of vocational guidance for minors and young adults. So this is the dream world. This is the real world, because there is a lack of operators adequately trained to support the construction of career paths. And it remains a bit unclear how this career development trajectory are supported. Work and educational paths are used as instruments of containment, simply containment, become a transmission belt of injustice and stereotypes, for example, with a low level of training or jobs offered, for example, in a probation program. And we don't deal with the real cause of failure, the failure to overcome stereotypes and cultural barriers within the community that in their educational and professional reintegration. Now we are going to see two slides. These are the professional course, the activity carried out for minors. And as you can see, we have the professional training, for example, in cooking and catering, as the literature we see, construction, and so on. But for me, the most important thing is that these activities are indoor and not outdoor, not meeting the integration in the community of reference for the minors. The same situation we can see for adults. Sorry, is a PDF from our ministry. I cannot modify Italian language, but the situation is the same. Food-related services, garden and agriculture. Is very interesting. Also, the interview with the chaplain of Rebibbia prison that confirm the idea as containment for professional training, and people are considering hopelessly and unproductive. The idea is then the usual one, that one just has to contain them, and there is no link with the world out of the prison, means of the prison. Now I will tell you about some specific research or intervention of our group in this area. The first regard the psychological counseling services, university services, orientazione. We had a specific project, Orientazione Gas to the Prison, where we had monthly group meetings within the prison for 3 years. As you can see, in the middle of the nothing, we have in Sardinia another 2 prisons in this, at the center of the island, and not on the beautiful landscape of our island. During this project, we were able to administer quantitative tools, and as you can see from the result in all dimensions, self-efficacy, this is self-efficacy, social support, resilience, hope, agency, hope pathways, and optimism. The group of prisoners showed lower scores than non-prisoner students, maybe problematic students, who were undergoing group counseling meetings for experiencing difficulties in their university path. We then also interviewed them regarding their university career, and what emerged is that the study was a fortuitous encounter, and when we talk about luck, about fortune in a career path, that this means that the vocational guidance process is not working. The absence, impossibility of professional career plan. Many prisoners have life sentences in our case. The absence of a relationship with the other students and academics. University career is perceived as a social message to the others, mainly the family members, and as a personal growth. Another year, I propose other more recent interview with other prisoners from other prison of Sardinia, and with university tutor students to support the prisoners to study paths. Let's start with the tutors. Tutors have many tasks and duties, very important for the career path: motivational support, for example, educational and information technology support, management of teaching materials, especially loans of a book. But despite the importance of their role, no specific training is provided to the tutors, for example, to work with vulnerable people. And the 50% of tutors declared that they apply for this job to do a first work experience, mostly for the lack of the other job. This is a very problematic question. During the pandemic period, an hard period for everyone, but for the prisoners, maybe more. Only not only, the 30%, around the 30% doesn't achieve neither one credit. Pre-pandemic was about the 8%. And a tutor said us during the lockdown, activities were practically at a standstill. Either the prisoners were able to buy books themselves, or they stayed without study material for a very long time. Difficulties, lack of relationship, but also I focus on prejudice and fears. Fear, for example, of dealing with acclaimed criminals, often perpetrators of violence, but also a positive aspect, human, social, and ethical aspect, being part, for example, of a path of some people who are trying to change their lives in a positive way. That's difficulty. I focus only on this sentence. Maybe is a representative of the students' difficulty. They are often found studying in the bathroom with earplugs in their ears to avoid being disturbed by their fellow inmates, and leave, if necessary, to let their fellow inmates use the toilet. Also a problem, a bureaucratic problem. Their cards for the loan of the book were often suspended because of delays in the return of the borrowed text. An obvious delay due to the absence of people who could dedicate themselves to returning them. In this case, the prisoners are not guilty for this, but for other things maybe, but not for this. And the interview with Destiny, the idea of the future in school training, university, and professional field is training to find a decent job and continues the study. But also in the future, in general, they want to take care of their family and mostly finding a decent job another time. And the difficulties are the same, raccontate non mi viene in questo momento, told by the tutors in relation with the teacher, the absence of relation with the teacher, and the difficulties to attend the class. So what we can do as a career support professional at the individual level, of course, we can continue to support career paths with individual and group counseling. It's very important, but for me, it's not enough, because we have also to try to change the context at the social and community level. For example, we can offer to the tutors specific training for working with people in vulnerable condition. We can speak, for example, with the university administration to create rules more inclusive for law and books, for example. Exercise a moral suasion toward the professor to be more sensitive to the prison context. Nobody is free from the single story, as we can see. Speak with the prison administration to solve some easy environmental obstacle. For example, organize cells with only prisoner students. Create community awareness of prisoners' paths of reintegration and overcome prejudices. Because in our restorative project, we organize a meeting circle between community and prisoners. Another is a European project aimed to improve the skill of educators and teachers who works in prison, and we create only, I show you only this slide for EduPris project, where we have a specific section of the game to work on capability, dreaming about the future values, future scenarios, to reconstruct aspiration and to promote empowerment. Some reflection, and to conclude in 2 minutes. However, the outcome and the real challenge for me of career intervention in prison cannot be the simply reduction of recidivism. For me, it is a secondary outcome of our action, because the first aim is the reconstruction of a sense of identity belonging to the communities and sense of human dignity. For example, Majorano said it's not enough to offer any kind of employment to the prisoner, but we have to develop conscious choices favoring the assumption of an active role at the end of the prison. So we need to support people with respect to escaping rigid definition and labeling, view of oneself in terms of potential, not only limits, resources and strengths, widening the range of choices that people feel are available to them, improving their vision of the future, reducing the impact of perceived barriers and obstacles. How we can do it? Getting out from the bubbles. Also, of our offices and individual approach comfort zone is more simple to work only in this way, because we are used to work in this way, but we have to try to change also the context, facilitating the emergence of needs where they are least likely to emerge. No cosmetic intervention, that is no professional course of Ministry of Justice, just to understand, but truly curative ones with the systemic and organic, for example, vocational and educational intervention. And being as antennas, we have to transform, in my the individual demands also into systemic, social, and community responses to transform context that trap potential, potential. To conclude, I hope, despite having spoken about a context that seemed far from the context of your project, to have given you some food for thought for your work. For example, about the power of labels, the power of a single story. This influence, for me, individual identity, the interpretation past, present, and future, and how the world sees us. And this, I think, could affect every population in a vulnerable condition. Cultural processes change slowly, and tenacity, resilience, like Kenya, is the only effective weapon we have, even when we don't see the immediate effects of our work. In greeting you, like Chimamanda, I tell you that constructing stereotypes and overcoming the single story is for the people regain a kind of paradise. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ernesto. I don't know if you have any comments or questions for Ernesto.
Yes. Well, I just want to say thank you, and that I find very pertinent that you use the single story reference to Chimamanda in this context. I think it's very necessary, and as a Latin American person, as migrant, I want to say thank you. That's all.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments? Okay. So, thank you, Ernesto.